And ABC News contributor, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, retired Lieutenant General Doug Lute is here for more. General, thank you for coming on. So General Kane says the Pentagon will look at a range of options if it ends up being tasked with escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Do you see that happening? And if so, how?
Well, I think the escort mission is exceptionally difficult because the naval vessels that have been assembled so far, in particular those in the North Arabian Sea, are centered on another mission. And their mission is to protect the carrier, the aircraft carrier. And so they're in a defensive mission now. So the frigates and so forth, which are in that mission, would have to be diverted to actually escorting ships across that 20-mile wide strait. And by ships, it's important to recognize there are hundreds of ships transiting that need to transit the strait in both directions, both into the Persian Gulf and exiting the Persian Gulf. So this is a huge mission.
Do we have any other recourse to try to force the reopening of the strait?
Well, look, the Iranians have not closed the strait by way of physical military means. They've closed it by way of threats, right? And then these commercially owned ships have taken a commercial decision, a business decision, not to take a risk. So one of the things that we've done early in the attack campaign, in the bombing campaign, is to attack the shore-based surface-to-sea missiles that would actually range into the strait. So that work has been largely done. The Iranian Navy has suffered very heavy attrition, but the commercial assessment, the insurance assessment, is that the straits are not sufficiently secure to allow passage.
Secretary Hegseth criticized what he called quagmires we saw under Bush and Obama, saying this is not an endless nation-building effort. You were the senior National Security Council advisor to Bush and Obama. So what's your response to that, and how is this situation different?
Well, look, this all starts with objectives. I mean, if the objective is as broad as the president first described, regime change and so forth, then the only way to actually prosecute that, to achieve that, is to put boots on the ground, to occupy the country and so forth, as we did in both Afghanistan and Iraq. On the other hand, if the objectives are more narrow, if they're just military objectives like the Iranian Navy, like the drone and missile capacity, the factories that produce those weapons and so forth, then that may not require actual troops on the ground. So it really goes back to this question of what's the objective? And once we have the objective, we can then piece together exactly how to get there.
Based on the progress so far and the goals the administration has laid out, how long do you see this lasting?
Well, I'm just reading the president's comments over the last several days. When he's begun to say that our objectives have been met, he's not talking as much about regime change now. He's talking about these more narrow military objectives. Those comments have been echoed both at the Pentagon and by Secretary of State Rubio. So I see a gradual and perhaps inevitable narrowing of the objectives to something that's actually achievable. And that would suggest the president's patience perhaps is waning. I think there are three major pressures on the president. One is the market pressure. For example, oil and gas flowing in and out of the Gulf. We've seen that already on the American economy. The second is munitions. Many of the high-end munitions that we've used, especially those to defend our partners and our interests in the region, are diminishing. Our stockpiles are running low. And then finally, the internal pressure from the president's own political base.
Hegseth took issue with the media saying the war is expanding or spreading, saying it's actually quite contained. Do you agree?
Well, this goes back to objectives again. If the objective is a narrow set of military objectives, then it seems pretty well contained. But as you reported earlier in this show, the Israelis have taken the fight to Iranian oil production and storage facilities with an intent, apparently, to extend the pressure on the Iranian people, on the Iranian economy. And so there seems to be some divergence here between relatively broad objectives by Israel and the constant narrowing, the persistent narrowing of objectives in the U.S.
President Trump says he spoke with Russian President Putin about the war with Iran and says Putin wants to be helpful. But sources tell ABC News the U.S. believes Russia has been providing Iran with the locations of American troops. So how do you think the U.S. should approach Russia's role in this war?
Well, actually, I think we should have been much harsher with Russia, much more firm with Russia, having over the last year, having to do with the war in Ukraine. But this pattern of seeing things through Russia's perspective seems to be persistent in this administration. And that's troublesome, not only in the region at hand in the Middle East, but even more important in the war in Ukraine.
All right, General Doug Lute, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.